Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Fans versus Critics. And today we're going to have an anticipatory talk with two Whovians about Doctor Who's Series 11. It's going to be airing its first episode soon, and it features, of course, the first female Doctor, played by Jodie Whittaker. So the announcement in 2017 was met fairly quickly with both joy and horror, as is the current trend. So this move by the BBC was seen as inherently political, with both those in favor of it, speaking of it, in terms of how it would inspire young women. So that's obviously a political angle. Laurie Penny, for example, tweeted, "I am so ready to watch a woman protagonist save the world again and again by being clever and moral without being rescued." So clearly a political bent. On the other side, many were tweeting about how this was a sad destruction of a beloved fan text by PC culture. Just a few choice tweets. Neath Blue stated, "And again, the PC brigade gets their way, RIP Doctor Who." And John Brown tweeted, "So the BBC has pandered to all the PC twats who insisted Doctor Who should be a woman. What crap." So those quotes are from Chris Tognotti's, apologies for pronunciation, July 16th, 2017 article for the Daily Dot. So, we brought together two Whovians to discuss this. We have Judith, who is a founding member of Fans vs. Critics, and our good friend and former student, Made Good, Liz. So, welcome, ladies and Whovians. I put together a few questions for you, and I just want to let our viewers know that you guys will be doing a follow-up at some point after you've seen a few episodes to discuss what you've seen thus far. So, first question, I'll leave it, you guys can fight amongst yourselves, but how long have you been a Whovian? And who is your favorite Doctor thus far?
I'll go first. I knew the favorite Doctor question was going to come up.
It's an important question.
Yes. So I've been watching since the reboot. I started with David Tennant, watched a couple episodes of that when I was actually in England, and then I went back and started at the beginning of the reboot. My favorite Doctor is David Tennant. I think that there's big competition, but...
Yeah, I have been a Whovian for longer. I have been a Whovian since I was a small child. Probably my first Doctor was John Pertwee, but I don't remember those years very well. I was very much a Tom Baker Whovian. That was during my childhood. Tom Baker is my Doctor. I've been a fan of the show since very early 70s. I went away from it for a while. The show itself went away after that, and I came back. I think actually I didn't start giving New Who a chance until the Matt Smith years, but then went back and rewatched the whole thing. Have watched the whole thing.
Interesting, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so my favorite Doctor is definitely Tom Baker. That's a nostalgia thing. He's my first Doctor. He's arguably the best, though David Tennant is also a favorite. So I have two favorites, Tom Baker for Classic Who and David Tennant for New Who.
I think part of why I wanted to ask about the favorite Doctor is because Doctor Who is unlike a lot of other fan text in that the Doctor regenerates. It's written into it that the very nature of the show means that somebody new will come along. And so fans of Doctor Who have probably had to get used to a sense of sort of maybe disappointment and loss when their favorite regenerates. And so I'm wondering, do you think there's, like, because David Tennant was the first one that you watched, that there's some kind of attachment to that and everything else is judged against him?
Yes, I think definitely to some degree. Yeah, the first one you see kind of feels like your own. That being said, I know I've said this to Judith before, I feel a greater sense of loss with the companions than the Doctors, and I have a harder time accepting new companions rather than new Doctors. And I think part of that is because the role that I most identify with is the companion to the Doctor, and so maybe there's some degree of like jealousy with the new companion, whereas the Doctor, they're so different than I am, so I'm willing to accept the new one.
That's fascinating, because I mean, that's an important point. The companions also change. Mm-hmm. It's a role, like the Doctor, that stays consistently throughout the show, but they come and go. And I know certainly there was a lot of fans who really identified with Donna, who felt that she got short shrift and sort of internalized that. Judith, what do you think?
Yeah, I understand that. I always am a little more wary when Doctors change. I'm especially wary around one particular identity, which is young Doctors. I really didn't like Peter Davison. Matt Smith, I warmed up to him, but he was never old enough to play the Doctor for me. And that's interesting because it is an identity, and it's not as though any of them, including Hartnell and Capaldi, are as old as the Doctor.
It would be hard to cast somebody as old as the Doctor.
Yes, because of humans.
Because humans.
But I do think it is harder for someone in their 20s or even early 30s to play that idea of age and loss. So I do tend to be more happy about older Doctors.
See, I see myself as a failed Whovian because I watched the first season of New Who, and it was Christopher Eccleston. And then I got attached to him, and then he regenerated, and I was like, well, I'm done. And clearly that means I don't understand the concept of Doctor Who. As a result, I can sort of understand fan disappointment with something they love, which, was very crucial to fandom. We love something, and somebody else has control over it. We don't, and we have to see it changed. So do you have some sympathy for fans who are wary of the new Doctor as similar to your own fan disappointment, or do you see it as inherently other?
I struggle to have sympathy with people who are so worried. It seemed like a lot of people thought that, yes, this was the end of Doctor Who and that the whole franchise would come crashing down. And to me, I just don't think that one person has that much power. I think that there's been, arguably bad Doctors. There's been bad story arcs.
Colin Baker.
I was going to say, who's the worst? No, there's more than one Baker.
There's more than one Baker.
Confusing.
The best and the worst are both Bakers.
So English.
Yeah, so to me it's like, it can be bad for a while, and then it can come back, and it can be good again. And I just don't see, even if Jodie Whittaker comes in, and she's awful, and the whole show just struggles, then a new Doctor will come in, and I think that Whovians who have been watching forever or since the reboot will be able to jump back in.
Yeah, I think that some of the fear comes from a totally different reaction to people based on gender. I've always seen the Doctor as old in part because I came to the Doctor as a child, so in some ways everybody was old then. And I've never seen the Doctor as a romantic partner, so I know that a lot of the Matt Smith fans who found Matt Smith attractive, had a lot of difficulty accepting Capaldi. And I thought the show did a really interesting job with that by making Clara the fan and saying, look, he's always been old. I do have some sympathy for people who see the Doctor in a particular way and don't see that as necessarily female. I don't want to just throw it out and say, you are being sexist, even if part of me does think that.
And some of them are. Like, there definitely is discourse that is sexist.
Yeah, I mean, when you have comments saying, what is it now, Nurse Who?
Oh my God.
That is just out and out sexism.
Yeah.
But people who just don't see the Doctor as female might have an unacknowledged sexism, which if you label it, actually reifies that position. As soon as you call someone sexist, then they retreat under attack and then identify more with right-wing politics, which will give them a place to say what they want, as opposed to reasoning with them, trying to think through. Maybe it's okay for the Doctor to be young. Maybe it's okay for the Doctor to be female.
And I think it's okay for people to be uncomfortable with there being a new Doctor, as long as they're open to it and are, willing to watch it and explore and see if the new Doctor can become the Doctor.
I think the catastrophizing, the RIP, this is the end, especially in a narrative that has this constant regeneration built into it, is deeply problematic. And I mean, going to your point, Judith, to what extent is the fact that this is a female Doctor, is this something that has to be a subject in the show itself? Should the show be gender blind? Is it possible to be gender blind? They might just not want to deal with female-centered stories, which I'm not able to get on board with, but it is this question of to what extent should her sex and gender influence her character?
I would say in the Earthbound stories, a lot. And in the future Other Planet stories, not as much.
Or differently.
So the thing is, she is female now, but she is still a Time Lord, or to use the discourse of the 1970s, a Time Lady, as Ramona was. In fact, I think Missy identified as a Time Lady too, but identified this as an old-fashioned position. The idea that gender roles are going to be the same across planets and across time is ridiculous, since gender roles are not the same across nations on Earth amongst humans.
Yeah.
I think that how she interacts with other humans, which, the Doctor spends an inordinate amount of time on Earth, will come into play. People will react differently.
Yeah.
And I think that dealing with those differences is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm torn. I know that they've, showrunners and writers have kind of talked about whether or not it's going to be addressed and to what extent it's going to be addressed. And I think, they have to find that middle ground, right? Like, I don't want to see a whole season that kind of plays with like, oh, ha ha ha, I'm a lady now. Like, let's talk about this.
Suddenly I love chocolate.
Yeah, so, but I don't want to see Jodie Whittaker playing a role that was written for a man. She will be her own unique character, and I do think that her gender will play into that to some degree. If we just kind of throw her in and pretend like she's like nothing's different and everything's the exact same, but she happens to be a woman, to me that wouldn't.
I think it also helps that she is having completely new companions this time. Much as I wish Billy had lasted more than one season, because she has been one of my favorites in the entirety of New Who. It's good to have new characters, new companions, because they're not going to be looking at her all the time and going, but you used to be a dude. They're not going to be saying, I don't know what pronoun to call you, in the same way that people who've known the Doctor in the past might. Though they didn't seem to do that much with Missy. I thought they dealt with Missy pretty well.
Yeah, I don't remember ever being bothered by how they dealt with that. And even though there are new companions, we still will likely come across old friends.
Oh, yes.
And it will be interesting to see how they do handle that, But they're always surprised that he has a new face.
Yeah.
And they often have a hard time accepting that he's the Doctor to some degree. So, some of that's to be expected.
Yeah, I loved when Sarah Jane bumped into David Tennant, because Sarah Jane is a Tom Baker companion, and it was just, that was one of my favorite early episodes in New Who, because it was that callback, and it was also that emphasis on the similarity and difference between Doctors. The connection that keeps going with new companions, with new faces, with new regenerations, but which still creates this distance.
I think that what will be interesting, like, with a female Doctor, in the same way as if they'd had Idris Elba as the Doctor, which also would have been fantastic, is that the kind of normality of white masculinity, right? That white masculinity just passes as normal in every situation and doesn't have to be accounted for, isn't there anymore, right? The one thing that there is in Doctor Who that I've always been, and it's because I'm a North American person and in many ways have normalized North America as the center of the world. I'm always like, why is this British dude always, why is he always regenerated as a British dude? But the fact that he's a white dude, I think gives him the ability to just sort of always be just normative human. And now we have to deal with stories that acknowledge that not all human bodies are normative in the same way.
Yeah. In the past, the diversity has been, why does Christopher Eccleston speak with a northern accent? Lots of planets have a north. and then the difference between David Tennant having to play down the Scottish accent and Capaldi being allowed to be Scottish.
Was David Tennant was told to not, because he has an excellent Scottish accent.
Not in Doctor Who.
Interesting.
And it was commented on, because he kind of went back and forth sometimes between Scottish and British. Yeah, he'd kind of switch around. Going back to, you were talking about normalcy, and I was thinking about that with Bill, and how a lot of criticisms of her were like, it's always about her being queer. It's always about that, and it's kind of hitting us over the head with it. You never heard that about Rose or Martha or any of those other characters whose primary role, I think Rose is a complicated character, but she was very much, in love with the Doctor. She had Mickey. Her role as a romantic human, was very much based in her heterosexuality. I just don't understand how Bill talking about it is somehow too much, and it's that kind of the normalcy, right? If you're heterosexual, it's normal to talk about your relationships, but if you're queer and you're doing it, then you're talking about it too much, or you're making too much of a point about it.
I think it's what I find frustrating is it's like, why can't it be like Rose's working classness, which is clearly central to her as a character and not something that, she should stop being so annoying with working class, or they have different accents, or they're from different regions. Why can't being a woman be one of the many things that isn't forced on us, but is actually a natural identity category that many people occupy, right? It's very frustrating that some identity categories get charged with, why are you pushing this in our face? And other ones are just allowed to shape the characters naturally, quote unquote. So what does it mean to you guys as fans to have a female doctor?
It is important to me. I hesitate to say because it's never been done, it's about time, but it is about time.
It even says it's about
about
time. I
time,
love that. I was
I
like,
know.
ooh, playful.
It's like the Captain Marvel. Her a hero.
I know, so awesome.
And I think that you can identify, I don't have to look exactly like someone and share all the same, identity markers with someone to identify with them. We've had a pretty narrow range of doctors in the past. Why not open it up?
Yeah.
And I have never identified with the doctor. I was 13 when I said, who is this young doctor being foisted on us? We need an older, more serious doctor. This is actually the closest there's ever been to a doctor who's anything like me. And that's actually saying something. That's important to me. You were talking earlier about always identifying with the companions. How much of that might be based on gender? Because yes, the Doctor does have male companions, but almost always there's a strong majority of female companions. Shaking that up a little is interesting.
And I can say, for all those of you who are listening and wondering why we can't identify maybe with people who don't look like us, we have. We do. It's frequent. It's common. I know for me personally, I get a little frustrated when I see people, for example, shooting down Captain Marvel, and I'm like, I was there for Captain America, damn it, and I was there for Thor, and I was there for all Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor, and none of the other ones. How come you can't be here for the people of color who finally get, characters like T'Challa on the screen? I know he's been around for a long time. And for those of us who are happy about having a doctor who's a female, why do we have to defend or apologize for this? I'm finding great frustration with that.
Yes, okay, she's a woman, but she's still white. She's still British. They've only changed kind of a minor thing, her gender.
It's not actually that much of a bigger difference from Matt Smith to Peter Capaldi than, say, Matt Smith to Jodie Whittaker. They're actually, in some ways, more similar because of age, because of hairstyle.
Yeah, it does make me wonder if she had been like Idris Elba instead, if that would have caused more anger, less anger. It's hard to say. These are, obviously, I don't want to do the competing identity politics thing, but I do find it fascinating the things that people choose to see as this is not me. When, as you point out, it's like intersectionality means that you can actually identify with her as a British person, as an adult. There's all sorts of ways that you can identify with her. And none of us can identify with her as an alien, which seems to be the greatest thing that separates her from the rest of us, but it's her female body that makes it insurmountable, and that's deeply frustrating. Do you think it's possible for fans and critics alike to review this show objectively? I do worry that there might be many series of Doctors over the years, and if you don't like this one, the next one maybe you'll like. But is it all going to come down to her gender in a way that will not allow it to be like, oh, maybe this wasn't a good show this year?
That worries me that, I've heard that kind of let's give women a chance, right? And I'm afraid that there's going to be that backlash of okay, well, we tried it once, and if this season isn't successful, then clearly it's because she was a woman. Let's never do it again. We have to go back to the tried and true and not think about maybe those seasons, the Colin Baker seasons that were not so popular, despite the fact that it was a man. No one said, oh, it's because he's a man.
Yeah, we should really stop this white guy thing because of Colin Baker. If only.
So actually, some executives during the Colin Baker years were suggesting a female. Tom Baker actually suggested that he be replaced by a woman at one point. So
you can't tell this, but Judith is vanishly smiling over Tom Baker and his rightness.
Yes, I think Liz was in the room when I was watching the 50th anniversary special, and he made his appearance, and there was literal squeeing.
What do you think? Is it possible to be objective in this situation?
Honestly, I am going into this with a lot of high hopes. Also, probably willing to cut a little more slack than I would be sometimes, because I want her to work so badly.
Yeah.
But that said, I will still recognize when things don't work. I wanted Ghostbusters 2016 to be awesome to prove all the haters wrong. And there were bits I liked about it. I did not think it was the worst movie ever, but it wasn't awesome.
Yeah.
I will recognize when it doesn't work. Though I might have different tastes.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things which some of the critics of the PC run amok who of the last 3 years, those critics don't like things I like.
That's a very good point. This might just be an opportunity for people who have not liked the direction of the show for the last few years to say, well, see, here's, another example of how it's terrible. But maybe blame it more on a female doctor.
I am hoping that she will not be the last female doctor. And I think that I'm kind of with Judith where I'm rooting for her. I really want it to be awesome. I want it to prove everyone wrong. If it's not awesome, then I hope that I will be able to acknowledge that. I think I will. And I'm hoping that maybe she'll leave and she'll be replaced by a woman.
Or a person of color, which would be nice.
Yes, which would be wonderful. I think that I will be much more able to be objective in the future for the second woman. I think that I will be really rooting for her. That being said, that might cause me to be even harder on her.
Yeah, that's totally true. That's totally a thing that could happen.
Yeah, I'm worried about that there will be too much pressure.
And I just want to make a point for anybody who thinks we're being unnecessarily weirdly box ticking here with me wanting a person of color and us wanting more women. And I just want to point out that for many of us, that just makes more interesting shows, right? That it changes up the storyline. I mean, with something like my personal favorite comics and their incredibly long continuity, but it's someone I was watching recently was pointing out that Doctor Who also has an incredibly long continuity where you're continually changing up the Doctor, but always calling back to the same beats over and over again. One of the few ways in which you can regenerate long-running continuity is to bring something new in. And, Identity is a large way of doing that. It's not the only way of doing it, but it's certainly one of the ways to do it. So we're not doing it simply to say box ticking, we want representation of all the different groups, but also for recognizing how does that encourage us to tell different stories or to inflect the stories in new ways that might freshen and reinvigorate the genre, right?
Well, and they're talking about doing that. I know that with the teasers they're giving about this season coming up, they're talking about the companions and exploring their various cultural backgrounds a little bit more. So hopefully there will be a bit more exploration than just kind of the straight white male
doctor
background.
And I mean, a lot of the politics that's been going on in the past few years, some of it, is just Bill being Bill, which she's great at being Bill, and I did not find her at all in your face. Something like the episode where the trees saved the world.
Heavy-handed.
It was somewhat heavy-handed in its environmentalism. The trees took over everything and were overgrowing, and it turned out that there was some sort of sun flare and the trees had to save the world, and so if we love trees, trees will love us back, and it was not good.
Well, and I mean, if you want to look at hitting you over the head sexuality, I mean, Captain Jack, that was a core aspect of his personality. Pretty well every scene, everything he said related in some way back to his sexual identity.
It's funny though, because I'm like, who totally hit you over his head with his sexuality? Captain Kirk in the original series, right?
Yes.
Right? Yeah, we have lots of Dean Winchester and Supernatural. Like,
yes.
There are plenty of examples of heterosexual males who hit you over the head with their sexuality, who don't get called on it, right? And so this is the thing, calling back to your earlier point, like, why are there some identities that are seen as more offensive? Well, we know what the answer to that is, but I mean, it's frustrating. It's frustrating,
and I mean,
right?
I think it's a great thing to be a sexual being and to, especially in a kid's show, that this is kind of being put out there as this is an acceptable way to interact with the world.
Yeah. So I only have one final question, which is, are you disappointed that the Doctor isn't a ginger? And when do you think gingers will get their fair and equal representation in popular culture?
British popular culture especially.
It's true. North American culture, gingers are well represented in comics.
Yeah.
In North America.
In England, gingers are actually a repressed group. So
it is a fascinating thing, which is sort of invisible to North Americans in a lot of ways.
I was sitting behind someone at a football game. My husband is a football fan in England, and she was yelling really rude, disgusting stuff at this one player on the opposing team based on his gingerness and asking questions about his genital hair and...
Oh my goodness! I mean, I ask it as a joke, but I'm also like, it does sort of show Doctor Who's leanings for all these years, and it's like the Doctor wants to be a ginger, right? And so that, you know, obviously desires, you know, to have some kind of different identity category, you know.
Yeah.
So maybe he'll be excited to be a she.
Yeah, and Matt Smith, when he first was looking at his hair to see if it was ginger, is like, oh my god, it's long, I'm a girl. Which then he figured out, no, he wasn't. But
now she is.
Yes, I'm trying to think through all the companions even. I don't think that there's been any...
Amy.
Right, of course, Amy. Yep, thanks.
When was Amy?
Amy Pond, she was Matt Smith.
Oh.
She was very ginger.
I'm confused. Was that
Amy...
before or after Clara?
Before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
a fair bit.
One of these days I'll pick it up. So how are you guys going to watch it? Are you going to watch it the first? Is it available in Canada?
It is available in Canada on Space at the same date, and I will be watching it as soon as it is airing and taping it and watching it again the next day, I'm sure.
and I'm torn because I usually like to rewatch the last series before, just to get myself caught up.
Yeah.
But new writer, new Doctor, new companions, that probably won't be necessary this time. But I did rewatch the Christmas special in anticipation.
Yeah, I haven't rewatched the Christmas special yet. I did rewatch the two-parter at the end of the last season, which was really good. I'd forgotten how good it was. I loved the John Sim Missy stuff.
Yes, that was so good.
Yeah.
I enjoy watching you nerd out, but I mean, your point about the new writer is a good one, that it's like this weird space where how much is she going to be blamed for whatever goes down or praised? You know, the very fact that it's a woman versus the writing behind the show, which has also changed and has a huge effect on the direction that it goes. And those things are difficult to parse out.
Yeah. I'm hopeful because he wrote the first season of Broadchurch, and less hopeful because he wrote the second season of Broadchurch. And hopeful because he was showrunner for Torchwood, and less hopeful because he did the Cyberwoman episode of Torchwood, which was...
Ooh, that sounds like something I have to watch.
Torchwood, you really, I love to hate it. It was,
yes,
you know, I watched it all. It was
and I haven't loved a lot of his individual Doctor Who episodes.
Though you can be a good episode writer and a terrible showrunner.
Stephen Moffat.
So these things are, it's a complicated thing. I mean, I guess in the end, it's that weird feeling of anticipation where you want something to be good. On the one hand, we have fans who are really eager for it to fail, and then you have fans who are really eager for it to succeed. And to what extent are either of them going to be able to watch the show and evaluate it as it is?
I mean, how much does it have to live up to your expectation? Like, I don't know if this really ties in, but just to talk about Bill again, I was really, really excited about her, and I know that you really liked her, and I really
You wanted to like her?
I did really like her. I think that she was robbed a storyline. I think that she never got to develop as her own character, and I think that her romance with Heather, I think, was woefully undeveloped. It was kind of this like, hey, you met this person at the very beginning, and then you're going to meet her again near the end, and they're going to run off together, and I don't think that they ever would have done that with a straight character.
Yeah, so it's allowing her to be gay without actually having sexuality as part of her storyline. So she has a romance in the first episode with someone who disappears into a puddle almost immediately.
As is wont to happen.
And then she gets to disappear into the puddle too at the end.
I mean,
spoiler alert.
At least they didn't kill her off entirely, which I
actually,
very much...
They never kill anyone off.
It's all just sounding like Doctor Who to me.
Yes.
The other thing I was thinking, as fans and as critics, because of course you have training in popular culture and you also have training in popular culture, how do you watch Doctor Who? Is there a voice in your head that you're telling to shut up so that you can enjoy it? Or is the critical aspect of it central to your enjoyment? Are they sometimes in conflict with each other?
I'm generally speaking able to enjoy it as just a fan. I don't read reviews about them before I watch them. I try not to see anything about them before I watch them. I watch them through. I enjoy them, and then once I'm done, I'll kind of look through what other people have to say and then kind of challenge it and be a little bit more critical. One thing I love about Doctor Who is it is kind of cheesy. It is, it is silly. And so it's okay if a Dalek jumps on your face and, grabs you and scary but not really scary. I don't mind that.
Yeah, and since I'm a fan of classic Who, where the sets were made of cardboard and the Daleks were more obviously paint rollers and plungers and Cybermen were vacuum cleaners. So the genesis of the Cybermen in the two-part at the end of last season, I really actually enjoyed the sort of cheesy callbacks to that Who, and they even had a spaceship, which I looked at it and went, that's straight out of classic Who. That spaceship cannot fly, though it does. And so that kind of nerdy excitement, I can get all in. I can turn off my critical brain the first time I watch it. And then the second time I watch it, the critical brain comes in. And sometimes they're in conflict. A lot of the time I find that my critical brain actually makes me like something more, because I can see the layers, I can see how things are put together. And so there's both the fan callbacks I enjoy, my knowledge as a fan allowing me to do textual analysis beyond someone like Monica, the casual viewer, but also the critical apparatus, which allows me to enjoy shots, which allows me to think through what they're doing with narrative. That's the sort of thing which, if Monica gave it a chance, she might like to.
I would totally do. I guess what I'm interested in, too, is the question of, politics. So for some fans, the very fact of her doing any kind of girl power, woman power thing will throw them out of the show and destroy their enjoyment, and we might go poo-poo. But what if we're watching it and there's a moment where like, oh God, that's so sexist, or that's a bad representation? Does that throw you out of the show, or can you tell your brain? It's a hard one. For me, I'm kind of like, they're just not doing good storytelling if they're relying on bad stereotypes.
But yet, we both watched Supernatural for more years than we should have.
For our sins.
I found it too scary. I made it 3 episodes in.
It's scary, all right.
And then it gets scary for political representation. You are a black man, you die. You are a woman, you die.
Let's not even get into it.
Okay.
Sorry, what was that? Where
I guess I'm wondering if it does gender badly.
Right.
Can you ignore that? Is it possible for the show to be good and do gender badly?
Yes. I think one thing for me is I struggle with the fact that the showrunner is a man. If I'm watching a show and I feel like, a woman speaker doesn't feel authentic to me, or, I'm struggling with the writing, I'll sometimes check to see who the writer is and to see if it's a man or a woman. And if it's a woman, I can buy into it a little bit more. This is a woman's voice, whereas if I'm struggling with the voice and I find out it's written by a man, or if there's a white man writing a person of color, I have a little bit of a harder time buying in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, though at the same time, it gets complicated with something like Doctor Who, because you have the showrunner, and then you have the writers of the individual episodes, and they have also made a point of making a far more diverse writing stable for roster for this series than they have for any series in the past ever. And directors, too. So you've got writers and directors of individual episodes, then you've got the actors. And so what we see on the screen is not being created by one voice in the way, say, a novel is. And so I will often see how, say, with Indigenous representation, you can see actors doing things with really bad scripts, which elevate them above the source material and suggest resistant readings. Mm-hmm. Even when I see politics that jar me, it won't necessarily make me dislike a text. Even when
it would be hard to watch any text if that was the case. I think people don't realize that when they think of SJWs who are angry all the time. Is that I'm like, man, the vast majority of popular culture that we consume represents a whole bunch of identities really poorly. So we're kind of used to it, and yet we still consume it and find something to enjoy about it, right?
Yeah. This is the first female Doctor. I think that there are going to be moments where
it's clunky.
Yeah, where we kind of roll our eyes and go, okay, that wasn't really necessary.
Yes.
And I think I definitely need to kind of fight with my own. There's a part of me that
it has to be perfect.
Well, and that hopes that they're going to write her to not be too, I don't want to push the feminist agenda. Like, why can't she just be quiet and be a good doctor? why does it have to be about her being a woman, you know? And I want to push back against those feelings of mine because it is an aspect of her, and I think that is an important agenda to be pushing.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have to both completely forget that she's a woman because she's a Time Lord person and she is a human being and gender isn't the entirety of her persona. But you also have to acknowledge that she is female and that is different. And so you have to do both of those simultaneously, which is a really hard juggling act to get right. And something which white male characters don't have to do as much because they're not asked to be the sole representation. We have not just the canonical doctors, but every single non-canonical doctor with one exception is white males. You don't have Capaldi being, well, this is the white male doctor, or even this is the Scottish doctor.
Yeah, I think we have a lot more to discuss here. I'm going to suggest we close it off here because that was all very interesting. And I'm super excited to hear what you guys think about it. I do think that this is a show that will bear the burden of all future female doctors sort of rest on her. And I think that's deeply unfair. I think that we should accept that there will be clunky writing because there is always clunky writing and that they will have to negotiate her being a woman and being a doctor. And that should make us more aware of how the times the men didn't have to negotiate it, even though being a man is also an identity category, right? That should not be naturalized as something that goes without saying, right? But hopefully we will see what critics say. That's what I'm going to pay attention to, is what the critics are saying. We'll all be paying attention to what the fans are saying, and then we'll come back and talk to you guys, to you gals, you time ladies, in a few weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.